Folks, I need help. I, like so many others, have been struck down with something. I bought this game for a couple of quid and I just can't stop playing the damned thing. It barely even leaves my thoughts, and every time I go to the computer, I can't stop myself from another bump. I am, of course, talking about Vampire Survivors, a huge surprise hit from last year. Have you played it? Bloody good, isn't it? Can you stop playing it? No, you probably can't. It's got just about all the things needed for a crazily addictive experience, and above all else, it's a whole load of fun. The 30 minutes or so you spend on a run is like hooking up an IV filled with dopamine and relaxing with a constant stream of liquid bliss. I couldn't not get my own thoughts down about the game and talk about just why it's so great, why it became so successful, and why I can't stop playing it. Not that I particularly want to stop. If you haven't got a clue what I'm talking about so far, I'll tell you that Vampire Survivors is a top-down shoot-'em-up, of sorts, in the roguelite vein. You pick a character, pick a stage, and then enemies start coming at you. Simple as. You kill enemies, they leave gems, you pick them up, and that's how you level. Each level gives you a choice of new weapons and augmentations, or you can level up the ones you've already got. Ones themselves are timed. Waves of monsters get tougher and bigger by the minute, and the goal is to survive in the stage for 30 minutes. When you reach that mark, death comes at you and, well, in all likelihood, he kills you. The game was made by an Italian dev, Luca Galante. He started work on it in 2020, and it went into early access in late 2021. It started out small, and Poncle didn't envision it being anything more than that. A cheap game available for a couple of quid. A good bit of fun, not even a hugely original bit of fun. But then the YouTubers and streamers came. The precise turning point for Vampire Survivors, according to Poncle himself, came on January the 6th, 2022, when a pretty large YouTuber by the name of Splattercat Gaming did a very positive video about the game, and from there it erupted quickly. It rose from a peak of 12 concurrent players in December to a peak of 50,847 in January. Streamers picked up on the game very quickly. Soon enough you had the likes of Co-Carnage, Northern Lion and Asmongold fooling around with the game and playing a whole lot of it, and it even managed to get into Twitch's top 10. From there the game's fate was sealed. Luca was able to quit his job to work on the game full time with others. It fully released late last year and it won quite a few big awards. As Luca himself has said, it was quite a surreal feeling for this rather simple game to be brushing shoulders with the likes of Elden Ring and God of War up on stages. Now of course, to say that Vampire Survivors is a simple game does do it a bit of a disservice, although it certainly appears to be at first. When you start it for the first time you may well think, is this it? You have graphics that are pretty utilitarian and your only control is movement. Your weapons fire automatically. This is a cool concept in and of itself, but it's one that's very much rooted in mobile gaming. Indeed, Luca's direct inspiration for the game was an Android-only title named Magic Survival. When you play that, it's pretty easy to see where Vampire Survivors came from. Even the game's rather clear Castlevania inspiration wasn't wholly intentional. A great deal of the game's graphics came from an asset pack that Luca really liked the look of, and it was the asset pack that was inspired by Castlevania, rather than the game. A lot of the parts that make this game are quite basic indeed, but it doesn't take long for the game to sink those hooks in. Turns out that a heavily mobile-inspired game like this one can be quite awesome. As you play further, take in a couple of runs and unlock more items, the depth of Vampire Survivors becomes clear. There's a lot of different items, and the simple framework of moving around in this bullet hell type environment with thousands of enemies coming at you can be taken on in so many different ways. When you play this game yourself, and if you watch other people playing it, you'll find so many different approaches. You've got projectiles, area of effect, barriers, screen clearing bombs, familiars. You only have a few weapon slots, so you won't necessarily get all of these in a run. It pays to concentrate on a mixture of weapons and augmentations that heavily favours one of these groups. I tend to gravitate towards garlic. as a lot of players do. Weapons like this one and the Holy Bible create an aura around the player, damaging enemies as they enter. You can pick up gems very quickly using it just by walking into enemies, and its evolved form, weapons evolve once you max their level and have a corresponding augment, is ridiculous. It's quite overpowered, really. Others may use projectiles. Something straightforward like the knife can be handy, seeing as it just fires in front of you. Others, like the magic wand, home in on the nearest or random enemies. And then you have seemingly weak weapons that, with a bit of honing, can turn into ridiculous ones. The first time I picked up a rune tracer, I wasn't all that impressed by the slow rate of fire and even slower projectiles. But a few levels later, oh Jesus! Its evolved form, No Future, is basically a deadly firework display that kills all in its wake, an absolute DPS monster. But what about other more intimate weapons? Well, they can be very useful, depending on what stage you're in. The whip is quite handy when you're in a horizontal corridor, whereas the axe is very handy when things are a bit more vertical, just for example. And this is only scratching the surface. There's other weapons that create lethal pools for enemies to walk into, like the Santa Water, or alternatively, the Gatti Amari. These cats do harm to anything they scutter through, but in the higher levels, they usually come together for vicious catfights that'll wreck any poor sod who happens to be in their vicinity. Other items like the Pentagram, the Pichonne and Ebony Wind's bird combo, the Laurel, the Clock Lancet, some of them may seem worthless to a player at first, but trust me, they've almost all got something about them, especially those birds. I mean, just look at that brutality! So power up, power up, power up, and find the way you want to play. The weapons in this game are so varied and generally so excellent that you'll have a damn good time finding your style. Whether you decide to be still and create a magical wood chipper that enemies just get sucked into, or you get stuck into the crowds like Francis Begbie after he's thrown a pint glass over the balcony, or whatever approach you decide to take, you'll be picking up lots of gems, and lots of gold too. The random level slots and the items from treasure chests give you the sort of rush you'd find from opening a loot box without actually spending any real money. Luca used to work in mobile slots, so he perhaps knows how to channel some of that dark energy into those moments. You'll also work through the many unlockable items. There are lots of stages and challenges, lots of extra characters and items, an entire bestiary with descriptions of evildoers written by no less a figure than Commander Stephanie Sterling, and even more elements to be added to the game. With every one, it feels like the game gets a little bit deeper, much in the same vein as other classic roguelites like The Binding of Isaac. And the actual play itself is, of course, wholly satisfying. As you near a run's end, the screen is filled with action. You can hardly see the floor, your weapons are absolutely hammering the groups to oblivion, ideally anyway, and if you're recording or streaming the game then, chances are your bitrate's going to take a fair bit of punishment. Speaking of streaming, this game even has a Twitch mode where your chat gets to decide the character's build. Pretty neat, eh? There's a whole lot of other kooky little secrets dotted around, and in general, so much to do and explore. I've barely scratched the surface myself, but I know that it's a game that'll entertain me for many more hours yet, and I'm hardly alone in that. So what else do we have to speak about here? Well, we have to look at the world of the game itself. Even if Vampire Survivors may be a straightforward game with heavily mobile-influenced roots, there is a certain lore and story behind it all. Weirdly, it's something that perhaps speaks more to the game's own evolution from a simple distraction to a popular juggernaut than any initial vision that Luca had for it. As mentioned previously, your first run at the game might look a bit basic. You fire up the first stage, Mad Forest, and start as the default character, Antonio Belpace, who is somewhat Simon Belmont-esque and even starts off with the whip as his base weapon. This and the other early stages may not necessarily have much to look at, or much to explore. It represents how the game began, and how Luca saw it as, perhaps, just a simple game that was heavily inspired by another mobile game. I like Magic Survival, and I want to bring that experience to Steam. Mad Forest is a field, and the inlaid library is a corridor. But later stages, characters, and monsters, the things that were added as the game went through early access and gathered a whole ton of steam, if you'll pardon the pun, they start to get a whole lot more creative, nicer to look at, and a whole lot deeper. Areas like Dairy Plant, Gallow Tower, Moonglow, and Mount Moonspell certainly have a hell of a lot more about them that's interesting and worth looking at, and the playable characters go far beyond a set of more basic heroes. The music is also consistently very good. Nothing absolutely spectacular, but there's stage and character-based themes that'll happily keep you going and tapping your foot through all this massacre. Another cool thing is that the game doesn't take itself particularly seriously. You've got some rather odd locations, a lot of in-jokes that you'll probably get more if you speak Italian, the aforementioned bestiary written by Commander Sterling. There is quite a lot of good humour in the game that's fun to pick out, and in doing so, as you search for hidden items, find new areas, and build this game up more and more, you delve further into the lore and the world that exists here. It's not something that was set out for Vampire Survivors at the beginning, but as the game's got bigger and bigger, it has most certainly come to life. It is a curious one, still. What other factors allowed this game to catch lightning in a bottle? It says a lot about the joys and weirdness of the gaming world when something like this, a title largely built off an asset pack, can capture the imagination so hard. It certainly surprised the developer, who never had such a grand vision for it. He admits that Magic Survival was a huge inspiration, and in another world, perhaps that game's the one that catches fire. Even the title of the game speaks to its slightly ragtag nature. Vampire Survivors doesn't actually have any vampires at all in it, although such things even add to the game's lore for some players as they play and search for the crumbs of narrative that are dotted around these massive stages and playable characters. It's a very open game. Now you may look at the tons of enemies and surmise that this game is rock hard and quite possibly frustrating as all hell, but it's really not. It's actually quite casual in many ways, and playing it can even be relaxing at points. Something where you just go with the flow, just meander along a stage, walking about, taking in the sights and putting thousands of ghouls to the sword. Watching the game is certainly quite relaxing and enjoyable. That's the impression I've got from my viewers when I've put it on stream, and I definitely get that from watching other people play it. But there is one other quite important factor that, perhaps more than anything else, drove the game into the stratosphere. Vampire Survivors on desktop is one thing. Vampire Survivors on your mobile is another, but it's only just been released on Android and iOS. The real evolution, as it turned out, was Vampire Survivors on the Steam Deck. Unwittingly, Vampire Survivors became a flagship title for the Steam Deck when it launched in February of 2022, an absolutely perfect game for it. It runs fine on the device even when the game's at its wildest, and it has all the elements you need for a perfect handheld title. The simple controls, the highly addictive qualities, and it doesn't necessarily take up your entire attention all of the time. You cannot go wrong with Vampire Survivors as a handheld title. A lot of people have commented on the irony of it all. One of the big selling points of the deck is that it's a powerful piece of kit in your hands, capable of running hit modern games like Elden Ring, Horizon Zero Dawn, Spider-Man, and the Final Fantasy VII remake. And yet so many people would rather play something like Vampire Survivors on it, a relatively much more simple game, even if the gargantuan amount of sprites and effects nearer one's end may occasionally bring it down to a still totally playable 40 FPS or so. The experience of playing this on Steam Deck may be even more ideal and even more perfect than the one on desktop, and it all worked out because the game blew up at just the right time, precisely when Valve were launching their much anticipated handheld. For all you may have to twiddle a little with graphical settings when it comes to some of the beefier games that still work very well on the deck, there is a lot to be said about a game that just works immediately, and gets you playing in seconds. That's the cornerstone of any successful handheld, and Vampire Survivors fills that role for the Steam Deck. It was the most played game on the deck in December of 2022, a position that it's enjoyed in several more months of the past year. A whopping success indeed. Now, the story of Vampire Survivors is far from over. This is the sort of game where you can easily add a lot more features, characters, items and monsters to keep the fun going for a long time yet. The first DLC, Legacy of the Moonspell, released in December, adds a whole new feudal Japan inspired stage, weapons and lots of Oni and yokai to kill for less than a couple of quid. And one would imagine that there's going to be plenty more in the offing. Obviously there's other platforms for the game to eventually make its way to. Word on a much talked about Nintendo Switch version is still silent, but presumably that's going to come someday. Judging by their insistence on doing the mobile port for the game in-house, Poncle will be happy to continue to work on it for the foreseeable. The game's turned from a simple one-man affair to something that requires a whole paid crew working away in London on the game that, as Luca Galanti says in his Twitter bio, he accidentally made. It may not have been designed or birthed in the same way a more traditional modern classic tends to come about, but we are all pretty glad that it's here, even if there's literally no way we can stop playing the bloody thing, and it'll disrupt our lives for a long time to come. Bye for now.